Please will develop a reverse Earth mode, make everything say 25% slower. We actually developed a mode that was like a punishment mode once, where you just picked bad champions for your opponent, so that everybody was miserable. That was one of our worst performing modes, because it turns out the joy of making your opponent play something miserable does not substitute for the misery of having to play something miserable yourself. Thoughts about Draven? His ban rate's high. Yeah, he's going to be the most banned character, one of the most banned characters. I think one of the reasons he's frustrating to play against, but one of the reasons he's also just really good if the player is good at him. So we tend to have to nerf Draven for high MMR, because that's where the Draven mains like pop off, and then you're like, I don't want to play against that ever again. And so he's like definitely in a tough spot, but I want to note that in regards to character ban rates, we don't like gut characters for having like, you know, say 30% ban rates necessarily. We nerf them when they're too high. So like as an example, if Zed's at 30, that's fine. We're not going to nerf Zed at 30. We might nerf him at 40 or 50. And Draven kind of has the same situation going on, where we're okay with a character being banned. It just is a question of what is too much. And for us, once you get to the 40 or 50% range, that's when it becomes too much. And so Draven will probably be a character who's balanced around his high MMR ban rate, but we don't have the goal of eliminating his ban rate, if that makes sense. Like, there's no goal of like, Draven's frustrating and should never be banned. The goal is just like, there's some characters who will be frustrating, we accept that reality, and the question is, how much is too much? And for us, that's around 40 to 50% ban rate. Draven is literally a 60% ban rate in Masters in EU West. Isn't that too much? We don't typically nerf for individual regions. Every once in a while we will. Sometimes we'll nerf Belveth for EU West, and sometimes we'll nerf, say, Kane for China. Like, every once in a while we will nerf for individual regions. But generally we nerf for the game's average as a whole. So as an example, if a character like Draven has a 60% ban rate in EU West and a 20% ban rate everywhere else, that probably isn't reason to nerf him. Because it's probably just an indication that, oh, EU West has more Draven mains, right? Or EU West doesn't play characters that deal with him correctly, or things like that. There's a lot of like different reasons like why a character might be banned in one region and not others. And so generally we will not hit a character for individual regions unless it's like really, really just crazy there, and you know sometimes we'll do it. Why can't we see who is in the lobby? If I'm in a game with an inter, I'd rather dodge than suffer for 15 minutes. Well, that's kind of why to some degree, right? So one of the problems with showing people who's in the lobby is there are a lot of people who will then go look up everybody in their lobby and find reasons to be upset at them, right? So I'll give an example of this, because yes, of course, sometimes you might have a legitimate feeder on your team, and that sucks. Not saying that doesn't suck. Like, if you have someone who's been going 0-50 for the last 5 games, yes, it would be nice to know about that. But the problem is that generally isn't the way people use, like, looking up people in the lobby. The way people tend to use looking up people in the lobby is they look people up and they're like, oh, you're on a 5-game loss streak. I'm going to flame you for losing and try to get you to dodge. It's things like that. And so looking people up in the lobby doesn't generally create positive outcomes in terms of player behavior. It generally creates, like, there's just subsets of the player base who just want to find reasons to be upset and flame their teammates. And, like, that's an overwhelmingly, like, negative result. And so we generally think that, like, it's not really valuable to create this situation where you're judging everybody in the lobby. It also creates things where it's like, people have this weird thing of like, I only want you playing the champion you have 80% win rate on. So like, as an example, let's say I'm a support main and I play Lulu, Soraka, and Blitzcrank. And my Blitzcrank's 60%, my Soraka's 55% win rate, and my Lulu happens to be 45%, right? When you can look up people in the lobby, if I ever lock Lulu, there's going to be people out there who like look me up and like flame me for locking Lulu, because they're like, how dare you not pick Blitzcrank, your clear best person in every single game. And we do not want to be in a situation where we're encouraging people to only play singular champions in ranked. Like, there's many, many reasons that you'd want to play a character that maybe recently you haven't won as much on. And that's pretty important that people feel like they're able to do that, as opposed to like worried that if they pick their 45% Lulu, their teammates are going to just go crazy on them because they didn't pick their 60% Blitzcrank. And so basically it's like, looking people up in the lobby creates a number of negative interactions, as well as a number of like gaming the ranked system interactions where it's like, we don't think you should be, how to say it, the draft is part of the game, and looking people up and then dodging because you feel like they're not on their perfect champs is like, we don't want you optimizing the game that way, if that makes sense. And yes, there are negative outcomes. Like, again, it definitely sucks. I'm not saying it doesn't. It definitely sucks if you like potentially like have an actual inter in your lobby, right? Like, it would be nice to know and not have to play with them. But on the flip side of things, we don't think it's great when there's a situation where people can just be like, I'm going to game the rank system and only queue into games with perfectly optimal lobbies. Like, part of the game is figuring out what you're going to do when you have a character like, say, Quinn top, and maybe you don't want to play with Quinn top every single game, but some games you have a Quinn top, and so how is your team going to win with a Quinn top? Like, that's part of League of Legends. In regards to when bring back seeing who wants to surrender, that's one of those things that I would argue we should probably never bring back, because it only creates negativity, right? Like, what reason would you want to have for knowing who wants to surrender except to flame them for wanting to surrender? Maybe there's other reasons you'd want to know who wants to surrender, but like, the problem with showing people who wants to surrender is the overwhelming outcome of doing that tends to be negative. Because, like, okay, I know this guy wants to forfeit, great. What are the positive outcomes of knowing that guy wants to forfeit versus the negative is basically kind of the idea there. And so there's certain things that showing people, well, yes, it gives you information, does not give you information that can create positive interactions. It will often like trend towards negative interactions. And that's the danger of, like, say, showing who wants to surrender. So I would say that's something that's probably not too valuable to bring back compared to the other things that you were talking about. Plans for a Mumu in terms of a VGU? So I agree with you that a character like Mumu is a character that could use a VGU, meaning, like, you know, if we were to visually update him, that would be an improvement. That said, Mumu is also a character that, despite the fact that he could use a VGU, he's overall pretty okay. Like, his design and visuals hold up fairly well, all things considered, in Modern League. Again, doesn't mean he couldn't use improvements, but at the end of the day, he doesn't look all that terrible and feel all that terrible for how old he is. And so my guess is that a character like a Mumu, if he were to be VGU'd, would probably be lower on the priority list than some other characters compared to like a character like, say, Corki, as an example, or Zillion, right? So it's less that, oh, a Mumu doesn't need a VGU, and more that he'd be lower priority compared to characters that really, really, really need it. He tends to hold up overall fairly well in Modern League.